like to say thank you.
Right. Welcome to Indicio Identity Community event for September. Actually, still August, excuse me. We have amazing speaker today. We are talking about decentralized identity in oil and gas industry. Our speaker today is Bill Han, a co-founder and CEO of Rorica Identity. I think everyone is excited and waited. So why don't I give you the mic to Bill?
Thank you, Maya. I appreciate that very much. And tell you what, I'll go ahead and share screens if you'll give me that ability.
Yes.
Let's see what we can do here. Let's see if this works. Okay, can y'all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Presentation mode, we'll get this thing started. Okay, I appreciate everyone being here, taking the time out of your busy day. Again, my name is Bill Hen. I head up the Rorica Identity. I've spent about 30 plus years in the oil and gas industry, working all the way from a junior level field engineer all the way up to a vice president of global accounts in a large service industry. And recently started up Rorica Identity because we started looking at things in the industry. In my course of my career, I've had, like I say, a little over 30 years in looking at real-time information, real-time data, working all across the globe. And it really gets back to one thing, and it's about identity. And as we've seen in recent headlines, everything we do, everybody's out to try to figure out who we are, what we do, trying to get as much data as we can. And I'd like to try to step back and say, let's hold on to our identity and let's see how we can maintain it to create good for the world and really take back that identity. But it's across the board. And so today's presentation, really, we're going to talk about Houston. We have a problem, and it's an identity problem. So let's go on, move to that next one, make sure the things are changing. Everything, can you see that, Maya? Just shake your head yes or no.
No.
Let's see if it's.
We're on slide 1 still.
Slide 1. Okay, so let's go back. Let's stop sharing and let's move to the next one. Share screen again. Let's try this one. Share. How about this? Can you see slide 2?
We see real-time operations.
That's perfect. So I started researching back and trying to think about why do you want to come and talk to me today? Why do you want to listen to what I have to say? Well, I've come up through the organization, like I said, and in 2002, I started going back through some notes, and we gave a response, a presentation to the Department of Homeland Security about real-time operations. And so this was back in 2002. And I started thinking about it and saying, well, wait a minute, why were they interested? Well, it was oil and gas is a critical infrastructure at that time, even in 2002. Well, we all know oil and gas has been a critical infrastructure all the way back to World War I and World War II. It powers everything that we do and requires energy to move people and things across the world. And so they wanted to understand what we were doing in the operations and maintenance division across our organization. So when we started looking at it, I said, well, let's just go back a little bit and see what they were looking at back then. So can you see what we're seeing now? Just so we've got the flow of things. Okay, perfect. So back then I was over the business development of a operations and maintenance division for a company. We had 4 product lines, little over 8,000, 5 million work hours, both onshore and offshore. We had about $1 billion in revenue in 2001. We were going to grow the business of about 16% in 2003. So the activity of that organization was pretty global. Our whole focus was in upstream, downstream, power services, and facility services. These were what the clients were looking for. This is what our company developed. And, and we were one of the largest operations and maintenance companies in the world at the time. And so we crossed all boundaries in the critical infrastructure. We started looking at our organization, and it was just coming out having web-enabled solutions. So we were giving access to people at the plant. We were focusing on the systems. We were focusing on the processes globally. And that was one of the big things that we started looking at. And we're saying, well, wait, why are they so interested in this? And if you think about what happened on September 11th, people infiltrated airplanes and got into secure areas and crashed them into buildings and such. And a lot of lives were lost. Thinking about the same infrastructure, if people got into critical infrastructures in the gas pipelines, you could actually have catastrophic loss as well in the plants and on some of the processes and systems that they're used if they gained access to them. So it really got back down to the same question. They had an identity problem, and they wanted to understand a little bit more about the actual plants, processes, and people. So it really ties into, our discussion today. And what we're looking at, again, we have an identity problem of verifying people and data with trust and privacy. That's really the key today. Is I want to talk a little bit more about verifying people and the data, making sure that you trust them and it's done in a privacy manner. But let's move on a little bit more and talk about the agenda today. And today we're going to be talking about security landscape for global enterprises, the recent cybersecurity executive orders, what is decentralized identity, and then let's look at a couple case studies, really focusing around the zero trust and how we can use that in the future in the oil and gas. And a lot of people look at me and say, well, Bill, what's this little graph or this little picture on the side? Well, that's Yellowstone Lake, or not Yellowstone Lake, but that's at Yellowstone Park. If you all haven't been out there, definitely get out there and go view the wonders of nature out there. It's just the parks in the United States are just phenomenal. Go out there and take a look at it, but it is real and it's verified. This is actually a picture I took of it. So I know, and I'm an avid photographer. I just love taking pictures, and this is one of the key things that you can take a look at out at Yellowstone. So let's talk about where this industry is going. There has to be a new model for sharing trusted data. It's needed. We all know that data sharing is a must, and as we start to enable sensors at the edge, you're starting to have more data, more IoT connected devices. Now we're starting to look at how the energy sector, depends on all the information. But we also have to have systems in place to provide levels of identity and authenticate who that individual is. And, everybody's doing the things like VPNs, multi-factor identification, two-factor identification, usernames, passwords, admin accounts. But it's got to really focus on how those systems are done and really change the way they're doing business. Right now, it's self-attested, unverified digital identities. They're being issued to you, just like your birth name. You didn't ask for that birth name. Your mom and dad gave you that birth name. Your driver's license. Yes, you may have taken the test, but the state gave you that driver's license. And so you're being issued a lot of these things, but they can be authenticated. So the other challenges are federated identity. It creates a complex system that has a single point of failure. So having decentralized capabilities gives you another, security measure, that is other challenges in the industry that needs to be thought through very cautiously, but still having the ability to make those changes and having everyone adhere to those policies is the key. And so it gets back to the same message. If you have data, you have an identity problem. So what's the need for the additional identity security in the energy industry? So like I said, I gave the presentation in 2002 to the Department of Homeland Security. Well, in 2011 and 2012, the FBI and Department of Homeland Security issued security advisories covering cyber attacks. So they've already started happening all the way back in 2000 and earlier. But this was just confirming. They had 13 confirmed compromises. 8 had unknown depth of intrusion. The attackers use the same things they're currently using today, emails, to get through and get your your login information, so they can install malware and other things in there. Things haven't changed a whole lot from then. They've just gotten better than received. There are very well-funded organizations that are out there. So fast forward to 2019 and current, we all went through the Colonial pipeline, the ransomware attack. But really what they did is they shut the pipeline down. If there were compression systems in place that potentially weren't shut off in a fashion associated with how you shut down pipelines, there could have been a catastrophic failure and people's lives could have happened, could have been in jeopardy. Same with JBS Foods ransomware attack. They shut that food processing facility down. Same thing with Aramco. They stole data from Aramco. And, they're one of the world's largest oil and gas companies in the world. So it gets back to multiple state, local governments, small businesses, healthcare, universities, all of them are at risk. And even saw a small little ISD this morning on the news, which is an independent school district on the news, was held at ransom for their data. And what they're trying to accomplish is steal, small kid social security numbers and names that don't have any credit history. It's a great goldmine for data intrusion and, taking their identity and using that. So the whole identity theme is the focus of Lorica identity. And that's really what we're trying to get through. There has to be a different model, not only in the oil and gas industry, but other industries. This seems to be the problem, and the digital world's being attacked by all sides. How many of you have your IT world out there that puts the padlock on there, and then your operational team says, man, I just can't get through. We need to get that data. And we just figure a workaround and we put a zip tie on it. Or vice versa. Your operational team has a lockdown and then they put an admin system on there to where the IT group get in there, but yet something fails and malware gets put on the operational systems. So you've got to look at all the holes, and that's really what the executive orders are all about, is really trying to find out where those holes are in your IT infrastructure. So let's talk about a little bit about the cybersecurity executive orders that came out. The first one came out in May of 2021, the executive order from the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, what we call CISA, I guess is how they put it together. But you are to report confirmed and potential cybersecurity incidents to the CISA agency when it happens. The second thing you have to do is you have to designate a 24-hour cybersecurity coordinator with your company. You've also got to review the current practices that you have in place around cybersecurity, and then identify any gaps and related remediation measures that you have to give to the TSA and CISA within the first 30 days. So that was in May. So in June, they should have had all that in place. And then they identified the 16 critical infrastructure sectors. As you can imagine, energy's in there, defense is in there, food and agriculture, government facilities, information technology, transportation systems, wastewater, water, and then government entities are all in their critical sectors. So what are they really looking at inside those sectors? Look a little bit further into that. They've focused on the 5 areas, which is identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And for our discussion today, we're really going to focus on the identity and protect, being supply chain, understanding what the supply chains were, how it can impact that. Proactive technologies that really focus on identifying who's in the system and access control. and then data security as well. Those are the things we're going to be looking at in a little more detail. The second directive that was put in place was July 20th, and it really revolved around accessing the pipeline cybersecurity. So you go into their system and you go into the website. There are a lot of companies out there that are working with the federal government to do vulnerability scans with you and your companies. They have the phishing campaign assessments to understand how your email group and how you're training your employee base. Really understand that you have to have a process in place and try to mitigate that risk at all costs. I mean, a lot of companies are even really reassessing the use of emails. Do you really need it? Or can you go back and use other channels that are out there available to you to communicate with your employees, but also have pick up the phone and call people like you should be doing and used to be doing. Also working with risk and vulnerability assessments. That's what everybody's, you have to go through and do that. That's required. And then validate your architecture design review. So they're partnering with a bunch of national labs in the DOE to where you can work together with them and highly and work through and understand the roadmap that you have for improving your security, not only in the pipeline sector, but other sectors that are out there too. One size doesn't fit all, but a lot of these things can identify what's your current accessibility and your plans are. First thing I would do is make sure that you go in and update your backup system. Definitely have a backup in place of all your critical design, critical infrastructure in case something does happen. You have a backup to where you be backed up on a actually a bi-weekly basis, if not further. So looking at their pipeline cybersecurity risk mitigation, they focus on the boundary protection, monitoring, configuration management, and access control. I've put a little circle in each one of those that talks about where I see verifying credentials really fits. Just like the mitigation and the boundary protection, it's block direct access to and from the ICS to the internet unless secured through a proxy on a corporate network or VPN with multi-factor authentication. That's the same thing. That's verifying who has control can get into your systems. The monitoring aspect, it's really understand and validate your communications with the new IP addresses or domains from the operational technology environment. Monitor any abnormal traffic and behavior, simultaneous logins, VPNs. It's really getting back to who's gaining access to your system. Configuration management, same thing. Look at your OT devices and your IT devices. Understand who's on your network and really focus around what people are doing in there. Are they updating, systems, downloading software? Those things have to, even some of our, in the previous company I worked for, we couldn't download anything from the internet without our IT organization. I thought it was crazy at the time, but that was 10 to 15 years ago, and I fully understand why it was happening, which was great, made our systems a lot safer than they were. But the emails still were challenges for those organizations. And then the mitigation, access control. That whole bucket there talks about just understanding who's in your system, not only from a IT and OT perspective, but even from an access control, getting into commercial buildings or refineries or pipeline compression facilities or pipeline facilities. Just understanding who those individuals are needs to be addressed in your systems. So let's talk a little bit more about decentralized identity. What is it, and how does it fortify your existing data infrastructure? We're going to talk a little bit more about what is a trusted data ecosystem, what we call TDE. The original principle of identity, it's a collection of data from various sources. Who better knows what identity is than your big tech companies like Google, Microsoft? They know more about you than you know about yourself. From the source of the things that you click on your mobile device to what you search on Google, what you search on Bing, they know everything about you, and all it is to them is a piece of data. And what is it? It's to sell you something more, or it's to steal your data. Those are the two things that what I call the SS, sell and steal. So our goal is to take that back and get really focused around who can see my data. And decentralized, if you don't need to talk to, what we call decentralized, it means that they really don't need to talk to each other. All they need to do is have the ability to share the data efficiently at my request, or the company's request, or a computer program's request to validate that this data hasn't been altered before. And so what I put in there is really around verifying that those things are true, and you can utilize a decentralized identity blockchain network to do that. So like I say, it can be employment history, it can be employment records, it can be third-party system credentials, certifications, training, logins, passwordless logins. It could be mission-critical data sensors, credentials as well. As we move all of our sensors closer to the edge to make real-time business decisions, you still need to have that same type of encryption, but also validation that nothing's changed in that system. And that's really what we're talking about, is taking things to a different level, utilizing the blockchain network. So what we've developed with the Indicio network is really focused around the issuer, the holder, verifier, and using Hyperledger Indy as the blockchain network designed specifically for identity. And the nice part about it is it really focuses on the fraud resistancy. It gives us the verified data from the source. And so the issuer doesn't have to actually be connected to the verifier. It just knows that the verifier says, yes, I've used the blockchain because it's written data to the ledger, and the issuer, when it issues it that, the verifier can go say, yep, that's correct. That verifier is coming from that issuer because the holder gave me permission to go look at it and say, yep, we're there. So it's really, it can be a zero trust framework that you don't get with paper credentials. Paper credentials can now be, forged, just like we're seeing with the COVID passports and COVID cards. I mean, that's been a fiasco, but there can be a way to fix it if we all work together, and really through the open source products. I think that's the big share of where we're going with this technology, and having a machine readable governance is key to making this all work. So let's talk a little bit more and go into more use cases of what we're trying to see. So I briefly described how the system works, but it's a trusted data ecosystem. It's not just a wallet. It's not just an app. It's really the whole ecosystem around what we've built and what we're trying to bring into the networks. It's not a rip and replace solution. It's an additive solution that brings tremendous amount of value to the organizations. It is GDPR, HIPAA, and CCPA compliant by design, which gives us a leg up on trying to build those into the system. So I'm going to walk through, you'll see steps 1, 2, and 3, and then you'll see little green checks and green circles here from the when the system happens. So what happens is the issuing agent, issuing company, it could be an oil and gas company, it could be a pipeline company, it could be a service company. Doesn't matter what that issuing agent is, depending upon what they're issuing. It could be a credential for work permits. It could be a credential for having the right skill sets on location. But whatever it is, it issues that credential to the holder. And that at the same time, when it issues it to the holder, it writes it to the ledger. So the holder now has the information. It receives and holds that information as a credential of proof. At that point in time, the verifying agent could be a drilling offshore platform. It could be a refinery. It could be whatever, but they need to have proof that you're qualified to come onto that location. It could be in that form or credential. So the verifying agent would then pull up his scanning ability. He brings up the scanning card. He goes to the holders. They scan that QR code on the holder that say he has the right credentials. It verifies that the holder has that information. At the same time, it goes and checks on the blockchain to look for the keys to say, yep, it came from that source. And once it's approved, then it gives them access to that facility, that base, that offshore platform, or that production facility. This can be said as well, it can be built into maybe it's an algorithm that is on the edge or at a certain area that you issue that algorithm a credential where it won't run until that is verified that that credential hasn't been altered. And it can be built in an autonomous fashion at that point in time. So it changes the way we look at things, not only from an individual perspective, but it actually looks at someone that could be a data component in an algorithm that's running these resources in real time, but it's still verifying that nothing has been altered in its original state as it was initially coded or whatever. That's what I see the true value of this whole process of trusted data ecosystem is changing the way we look at data, and having the ability to scale it in this is phenomenal as well. Other things are you just can't scale at this speed in which you can do with a decentralized credential. Looking at a little more detailed, what I'm saying again, it's simplified. Here's a very simple use case. When you talk about the data owner, that can be the individual, it can be a company, it can be employment history, education, certifications for training, or again, mission critical data or sensors at the edge. It's shared in full, in part, shared together, but it's also shared with zero knowledge proof that that's the individual or that's the company issuing that. And yes, the data is verified. And you see the little screenshots from a mobile device. It can be done with QR codes. You can share all of that information, or you can share parts of the information, but you know that it's been verified at a much more reasonable economic cost than what's being done when you scale one of these. You know, people ask, why should I care about verifiable credentials? My system's fine. Well, I think everybody can look in the news. I don't think systems are fine. I mean, I get attacked every day in my Microsoft 365 email system. Everybody fishing for information, and it's just continue. It's going to get worse. And the reason is because everybody moved to remote work environments, and cyber attacks have increased beyond belief. Ransomware is up over 150% from the previous year, 300% more in victims paying these fees. I saw on the news report this morning that even the education at high schools or independent school districts are paying on average $3 million just to get the information back. And who really knows whether they get all the information back or not? So it's really a challenge. The best thing to do is protect yourself. But in the oil and gas industry, we see everything from the reservoir all the way to the sales terminal and to the, you know, when you take it on even further downstream to the energy sector where you're actually pulling electricity, solar, it doesn't matter, wind, to the terminals at the employees or the individuals' homes. There's an information leak at every one of those is a potential catastrophic failure. And so your IT and OT infrastructures have to communicate very well together, but you also have to have the safeguards in place. And with your insurance premiums doubling and tripling and even more, it's going to be even more critical that you take a proactive approach to the oil and gas sector. And that's one of the biggest challenges that we see is everybody's doing what they can, but you need to continue to target your vulnerabilities at the least common denominator, and that's who's getting into your systems. And that's really what we're trying to focus on, is how do you change the way your IT and your OT systems are being monitored, but also monitor who's getting into those systems. You've got to build a better mousetrap and put that in place. So I want to open this up, leave a lot of questions, so, you know, to have an open discussion. You know, what can we help you verify today? we're building that trusted data ecosystem solution for business in oil and gas. And with the 30 plus years of experience, I've seen upstream, downstream, commercial facilities, pulp and paper, power, you name it. And I've worked all over the globe. Everybody is trying to figure out the best solution today. These are just one of the variables that we can identify and help. We're using also, I want to add one last slide. We'll talk about, we are part of the Cardia project under the Linux Foundation for Public Health. We see that all critical infrastructure requires the identity, and we can take lessons learned from this side of the business as well as bring it into the oil and gas industry. So like I say, I'll leave that up there for a little bit, but go back to the, if you have any questions, we can talk about it later. But go back to what can we help with today? And let's open this up, Maya, for questions. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions in more detail and keep the conversation open.
Anybody has questions? You are welcome to unmute yourself and speak up.
So Bill, I have a question for you. This is Ken. You're looking at a kind of a broad swath of the oil and gas industry that focuses on people and their skills and their ability to interact with systems. And then you're looking at IoT devices that are empowering the pipelines and so forth. Do you see one as being more critical than the other, or one happening earlier than the other?
That's the interesting part about this. The way the organizations are operating right now, if you have a pipeline critical infrastructure, they're definitely focusing on two things. Who's getting into my system, but has that system been altered in any fashion? And so they're happening simultaneously in reality. But that's the challenge that we see is getting in physical, getting into the plant, number one, is not a big of a challenge because they think they have a good understanding of who those individuals are with badges. They issue permanent badges to those individuals, but yet those can be, fraudulently developed as well. But most of it is really around the IT aspect of it, is who's getting into my system and has that critical infrastructure been damaged. And some companies are actually getting back to segregating and putting a clean air gap in between their IT infrastructure and their OT infrastructure. So they're physically taking the data, printing it out, or just viewing the data, but having very limited access to those systems. So they're clamping down tremendously on those systems right now.
Another really interesting thing that you mentioned very briefly was that you were talking about the ability to give an identity or some type of permission to the algorithms that are running inside IoT devices. So a lot of people focus on the data coming out of IoT devices, but not so much on the algorithms or the code that's being run inside the device. And so that was another interesting aspect of controlling that. Can you elaborate more on how that might protect oil and gas or other people who are reliant on IoT devices?
Well, that's where the market's going, is from having edge devices. There's a lot of companies out there that are putting, edge computer devices, small sensors that then communicate via, 4G, 5G to the systems. But you still got to understand that communication protocol and the security around it as well. Has that been altered? And you have to build something into it to say, well, if this reading changes by 10 psi or 100 psi, shut the system down. And it brings me back to when I worked for a previous company, the same model happened. We were starting up a large offshore production platform over in Malaysia, and we couldn't, for about a week and a half, we couldn't start the platform up. when we started going through all the operational, over 60,000 sensors on the rig itself, the production platform. So we did a complete key root analysis of what would it take to start this facility up, and we identified that it took less than 2,500 sensors to start the system up. So when we disabled all the other 58,000 sensors, we started the facility up on the first try. Then we added those other, continuous state type of sensors into the control systems, and the system's been running ever since. But it was a lesson learned 20 plus years ago when you start to think about it. Well, wait a minute. If we have sensors at the edge that are controlling these systems, and if they get compromised, what effect will it have on the overall system? And so that's when we started talking to the edge providers and saying, yeah, we got security in there, but how do you verify that that system hasn't been modified from somebody that gained access to your system? And that's where people are starting to look at it, is like, wait a minute, maybe now we can start programming verifiable credentials into the system that it has to check in real time, prior to, yes, that'll be based on a reliability, back to a decentralized, but that could be one that could be done on a shared network that you have, or your own network at that point in time. It doesn't have to be decentralized, but it does have to have a verifiable potential. Hope that answers your question a little bit there.
How urgent are is the timing of deployment of these types of systems to the oil and gas industry?
I think they're all looking at it as, we need to start doing this now. We need to figure it out. They all have, IT and OT professionals that are looking at meeting the compliance side of it from the federal government, but they're all looking at it from even a more, interoperability perspective, is how do we continue to bridge that gap between OT and IT and minimize the risk associated with, shutting the company down or not having the capability to bill, our customers or whatever. There's a tremendous amount of value loss if they get hit with a cybersecurity incident or a ransomware attack. And you're talking millions of dollars per day. And, over the course of a week, a month, it could be in the billions, depending upon how much volume is moved through whatever their system is. So it's a pretty serious issue but it's just this technology on trusted data ecosystem, the whole verifiable credential is new to a lot of companies. And so the first thing we have to do is educate them on where the risks are associated with that. And that's what we're spending the majority of our time with, is, having the ability to walk through the IT system, the OT system, and show how it works together. But from an operational perspective, and my background is I've been working through all those systems. I understand the risks that they're going through, and it's not as difficult as they want it to be. It's simpler than what most people. And so, developing a first proof of concept with the companies goes a long way. And that's what we're trying to accomplish with a couple of the operators that we're talking to today in the oil and gas industry.
One more question is the regulatory pressure that you're seeing. That looked like it was spanning, I think you mentioned a number of categories of businesses that were considered critical infrastructure types of businesses. So it's not just oil and gas, it's a broader swath of verticals.
That's correct. I mean, the July was targeted at the pipeline industry, but when you start to really look at it, I mean, they've listed the 16 different critical infrastructures, and we've seen 2 of those infrastructures already hit, which was food and agriculture was the JBS, and then the pipeline industry was the energy sector. But we're seeing it hitting the healthcare sectors. We've seen hospitals hit. We've seen, power. We've seen the water industry hit. I mean, so it's fair game. Every industry that's out there is being targeted. And it's just, they're a very professional group, and you've got to really focus on their next move. And so what you're trying to do is build that fort, and build that shield, what we call the Lorica shield, around everything that they're doing, and just try to keep the bad actors out of your systems. Or if they do get in there, now you can use your other technologies that you already have in place to identify what damage they've done and try to protect that backup. You're exactly right. It's hitting all areas, but the oil and gas sector, if you, like you saw in the Colonial Pipeline, you shut the pipeline down for 5 days, people aren't going to be able to commute to work. It could potentially shut the power systems off in the Houston heat. If we had another power delay like we had over the winter time, and you shut the air conditioning off in Houston, it's going to get pretty darn hot pretty quick. And so people could die just like they did during the winter of this year. So it's very critical for infrastructure and trying to verify your system and who's in it. That's the key for most oil and gas companies today.
I think your emphasis on IoT devices takes a different tune to most self-sovereign identities. It's not really self-sovereign, it's more of an emphasis on decentralized, because IoT devices don't really march and protest for their rights or anything, but it's more about how does the decentralized approach benefit the data owners and the IoT devices, how do they fit into that picture?
Yep, that's correct. I mean, it's the IoT devices, it's a numbers of ones and zeros. And but if it needs to be a 1 and it's telling you that it's a 0, then you can have catastrophic disasters. And so that's really what we're looking at, is the industry, and they spend $2 to $3 billion worth of capital investment in those facilities, and they want them to run at peak performance. And so all your sensors and everything have design parameters, and they're building more and more edge computing capabilities to where they're doing all the computing in the field. And so now you have to realize that that information has to be verified, that it hasn't been tampered with. And so you're starting to see things move to the edge, and that verification process has to take place at the edge and not just at the corporate headquarters or at the field office. Do you have any other questions out there?
Yeah, other questions. I've kind of dominated the questions time, but appreciate your being able to field those.
You bet.
Anybody else has any questions?
Maya, it doesn't look like we have any questions. I would ask Ken if he would comment a little bit on the Cardia Interoperathon and give a little overview of it, if you would, please.
Sure. I think that the Interoperathon is targeted particularly to the Cardia ecosystem that's focused on medical health status type credentials, and then the trusted travel that derives from that. I do think that its impact will go beyond just the health status credential systems, because the interoperability achieved and the lessons learned are applicable to other verticals as well. We are, I think, scheduled. I think we have about 8 organizations that have signed up so far to participate in the event and to test out their issuers and mobile agents on the holders, and then any government agents or verifying agents that may be produced as well, so that we can determine the effectiveness of the credential ecosystems. But I think Cardia is a template and a model for how other ecosystems based on credentials held by end users can operate. And the agents that are being produced, the code that's available there, can be applied to other verticals as well. And so we're looking forward to that interop event. It's pushing primarily right now fairly simplistic interoperability around the Aries credentials systems, but it does force vendors to get together and make sure that they're really walking the walk and not just talking the talk. In the future, we'll bring in other credential types such as the JSON-LD or BBS Plus signatures, and be able to test those as well. So in addition to the 4 agents that are represented, the issuer, government agent, and verifier agents, and the whole mobile agent, there's also a mediator agent that's implied to support those mobile agents. And there's a 5th component, or another component beyond those, and that's the networks. And we're inviting other network providers to come so that we can suss out the different difficulties in interoperating with multiple networks. The Hyperledger code base has enabled multiple networks to start, but many of the components know how to talk to a single network. Some of them know how to talk to multiple networks one at a time. And I imagine that we'll find out that there are some interesting challenges when you have multiple networks all at the same time interoperating. And that's another area that we anticipate to discover some challenges and be able to address those. But those that interop at Cardia is, like I said, a template for other industry verticals working together to expand the reach of verifiable credentials into many other areas. I think that the oil and gas industry is rather interesting because of its span. It encompasses people, it encompasses back-end systems and integrations that need to be performed there. It encompasses IoT devices to a higher degree than many other industries. And so it creates a more broad and general use case than just the specific application to oil and gas. But that will, I think, encourage and hopefully inspire other verticals to also take a similar approach to secure their assets and to make their users more safe and the interactions more privacy preserving, both for the people and the data of the corporations that are involved, so that those trusted data ecosystems can provide the benefits that the companies, governments, and people around the world are looking for.
Yeah, I agree completely. I agree completely. And Ken, thank you for asking the questions today. It's one of those things, the oil and gas industry is unique, but it's also just another industry that has the same challenges that everyone else is having right now with data security and identity management. And so I think having a technology, I've always learned that if you look outside your industry, there are amazing things that are happening, and get out and see how you can adopt those amazing things into your own industry, be an innovator. And that's what we've been able to do. And so I see that as this is the way we started Lorica, is to bring other technologies into an industry that is doing a lot of great things, but it's also needs help, just like every other industry right now on data security and data identity. So Maya, thank you very much for allowing me to give a brief overview of Lorica Identity and some of the things that are happening in the oil and gas industry.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bill. We had a great discussion and we learned so much. I'd like to share about next meetup. Upcoming next meetup will be September 21st, Tuesday. We will be talking about wallet. Matthew from Northern Block, he is going to moderate. We have confirmed with amazing speakers from different kind of wallet. The Global ID, DC, Liquid Avatar, Trinsic, ID Lamp. We will be having the fireside chat all together. So please register. And we are always looking for the topic. So if you have any suggestion, please feel free to email me at maya@indicio.tech. So thank you again, everyone, for coming, and see you next month.
Great, thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Bill.
you.